What if I told you that you are doing chess openings completely wrong? You don't need to memorize every single opening, and you don't need to learn chess traps to get better. In fact, it's as simple as learning three simple chess opening principles. I will show you these three principles, and only three. I know that there are some people who are saying there's 40, 50, 60 principles. You only need three. You use these three principles, you can play any opening. And to double down on this notion, I'm then going to apply it to the 14th game of the most recent World Championship between Ding Liren and Gukesh D. I'm going to show you how these grandmasters use these opening principles in order to play any opening and play into an even position against really two of the best chess players in the world. And like I said, this is without learning all 1400 different openings and all the sub variations and variations. And this is without using chess traps that really rely on playing less experienced opponents or people who aren't paying attention. If you want to play the top level opponents, you can't rely on either of these tricks in order to win. Principle number one, controlling the center. The center is simply just d4, e4, e5, and d5. It's the four squares in the center of the board. And the way we can control these squares is either by placing pieces on top of the squares or attacking squares. So those are two different things, right? Like the pawn is on d4, so we're controlling the d4 square, but we're also attacking e5. And you can control the center with other pieces as well. Like if you played knight f3, you're actually controlling d4 and e5. If our opponent played e5, we just win a pawn right away for free. So you can see that in those types of positions, you can control the center with a multitude of different pieces, and that includes bishops, queens, and rooks. Now, let's say we play d4. Our opponent plays d5, and we play c4. This is called the queen's gambit, but you wouldn't even need to know that in order to understand the principle here. Let's say our opponent takes that pawn, and we play e4. Look at this. We now completely control the center, and in general, we're taking up a lot of space. Furthermore, we're attacking this pawn on c4, so we'll probably win it back anyway. You can see that actually taking this pawn is a really bad idea and leads to massive center control for white. Now, how can we prevent this? Because obviously taking this pawn is not the best idea. Well, common principle is to play something like e6. Now, if we take, he takes back, and there's equal control of the center. There's really no advantage here. And then maybe we don't take right away. Maybe we develop our knight to c3. He develops his knight. And we're trying our best to get pieces into the center of the board. But there is much more to the puzzle than that. A key word I used in that last principle was developing pieces. While it's very important to control the center, it may be even more important to develop your pieces. What that looks like could be this. Let's say e4, e5. And we already know that these moves control the center in some capacity. Here we play knight to f3. And we've actually developed our piece. And what that means is we're moving our more important pieces that are in the back to more active squares. Let's say knight to c6, we play bishop c4, which is the Italian game. Once again, you wouldn't have to know this. You just put your pieces in good spaces where we're taking control of important squares. And then let's say knight to f6, we play knight to c3, and this looks like very healthy development. Now, some common principles you should look for here within the principle, right? So the principles within the principle. You don't want to bring your queen out too early. Notice neither side has brought the queen out too early. We're not really looking to double move pieces. Not too many pawn moves, just developing, getting our pieces on good squares, and just being prepared to play a long game. A very popular beginner opening is called the Wayward Queen, where after e4 and we play c5, our opponent plays queen h5. The whole idea is he's going to try to get his bishop out and immediately attack and win the game, right? Because if you take f7, the king is checkmated. In this situation, we're also hanging the c5 pawn because we are playing Sicilian defense. A very common opening where we're not actually in the center, but we are controlling it by exerting pressure on d4. You wouldn't be able to play d4 right away. So that's how we control that space. In this situation, however, we can play knight to f6, developing the knight and attacking the queen. And, you know, we are sacrificing a pawn here, but look what happens. After queen takes, we play e6. And now the bishop is attacking the queen. Another free development move. Let's say the queen moves back to c4. All of a sudden, d5. Once again attacking the queen and also taking control of the center. Pawn takes back, pawn takes, and we're attacking the queen again. if the queen moves over to, let's say, a4, instigating a check, we have bishop b7, once again attacking the queen. Queen moves over, and then knight to c6. Look at white's position here. He has all of his most important pieces at home. Meanwhile, the queen is sitting on b3. Your queen is not just a powerful piece, it is also a valuable asset. And if you bring it out too early, we're going to be able to bounce her around like a basketball while developing our pieces and getting ready to attack our opponent's king with ease. Then there's also the issue of actually moving your pawns too much. Let's say we go d4 again. We already decided this is a great opening because it controls the center and allows us to develop our pieces freely. He plays d5 and we sacrifice the pawn. After pawn takes, while we do have the option of playing e4, there's also the tricky e3 line, attacking the pawn with the bishop. But here, if our opponent plays b5, a useless pawn move, we can play a4. Now, yes, we're making pawn moves too, but this is actually a development move because if, let's say, pawn takes and rook takes, now the rook is developed and we're on an open file. Also, if he tries defending the pawn in some way, like let's say he plays c6 and we take, once again, we control the a file and we've developed our rook. Our opponent has no development. Let's say our opponent takes back here. Now we have queen f3, which is development, but also an attack on the rook. And notice here we've punished our opponent for making too many pawn moves. He can't defend this rook unless he sacrifices a minor piece. In that case, the minor piece will either be the bishop or the knight, but either way, he is in trouble and we have a big advantage already. And of course, there's the issue of double moving pieces. Let's say we play d4 again and he plays knight f6. Very normal opening. But after c4, he goes knight g4, attacking the f2 pawn here. Well, this isn't a very good move because you can just kick the knight with h3. And now what are you going to do? Sacrifice the knight? You could, but what's the point? You're down a minor piece. If the knight moves back, we go knight to c3. And notice here that we actually have much better development than our opponent. If he plays something like g6, we go knight. And quickly, you're going to see that we're going to control the center. We're going to have very nice development, and our opponent's going to be in a lot of trouble. He's not even going to be able to castle his king in time. This position looks a lot different if our opponent doesn't waste the move and play knight g4, double moving the piece. If instead he plays g6, we go knight c3, he goes bishop g7, and after, let's say, knight f3, our opponent castles. Yes, we control more of the center than our opponent, though he has a stake in it as well. But our opponent has protected his king and developed his pieces. Keyword, protecting the king. While these two principles that I've taught you already are extremely important, this next one is probably the most important of all, actually protecting your king. Because it doesn't matter if you control the center and if you develop your pieces, if you're about to get checkmated, because once you get checkmated, the game's just over. This is a really nice opening called the ready. After knight to f3, our opponent is going to look to just take over the center, which is fine. We have control of the center too. Like I said, you don't just control the center with pawns. Here, bishop to g2, and after some more development moves, we castle. Yes, our opponent has a bit more space in the center, and he looks as though he's a bit more developed than us, but our king is safe and his is not. He's still stuck in the center of the board. This is a target for later on. Meanwhile, because we've already castled and we're now safe from all attacks, we can focus on playing stuff like knight f3, b3, bishop b2, and then connecting the rooks and finishing our development. And just to show you how important it is to protect your king, check out this opening here, f4, which does exert control over the e5 square. This is called the bird's opening, and it's a very risky opening because of ideas such as e5. After pawn takes, he sacrifices a second pawn and he plays bishop to d6. Now, many of you might be looking to chase pawns here, but your king has a severe weakness. You must remedy this. Now, as an experienced player who knows you must protect your king, you would play knight to f3 because it protects the dark square diagonals from a kingside attack. However, if we're not thinking about our king and instead thinking about development, it would be very easy to play knight c3. In this situation, we have queen check h4. The only way to defend this check, because you can't block, is to play g3. And here, queen sack g3. Pawn takes, bishop takes, and this is an absolutely suffocating checkmate idea. You can see that not protecting your king is clearly the most important principle, because it doesn't matter if you control the center, which we are doing, or if you're more developed, which we actually are a bit more developed because the king is mated and that's just game. Now let's apply these principles to the most famous game of chess played this year. We now have our 3 puzzle pieces: control the center, develop pieces, protect the king. When you combine these 3 pieces together, we have a world championship game between Gukesh D and Ding Liren. Game 14, a game that will decide who the next chess world champion will be. Here we see knight f3. As we've already learned, this is called the ready. Ding Liren is developing his knight, and he's also controlling e5 and d4. At some point, he will play g3, bishop g2, and protect his king with a castle. Here, Gukesh plays d5. He's controlling the center, which is a very solid move, and preparing development of other pieces. Ding Liren plays g3, of course looking to develop the bishop and protect the king. We play c5. This doesn't seem like an amazing move, but it adds extra control to d4, and it allows us to develop our knight to c6, exerting more control over the center and getting one of our pieces into the fight. Here, bishop g2. We knew this was coming. Development, opening up the castle for our opponents. Okay, fine. Knight c6. We also knew this was coming because this controls the center and develops the knight. Now we see d4, looking to discombobulate our center and take extra control, also allowing this bishop to develop and opening up possibly queen attacks later on. We simply play e6 because now if he takes, we can take back, controlling the center and developing our bishop. So this makes complete sense. Instead, he castles. Ding Liren has protected the king, he's developed his pieces, and he has decent control of the center. So how are we going to respond? How about pawn takes, knight takes, and here, after knight to e7, if knight takes back, and we're able to develop. A better move would have been bishop to c5, because he would have actually been able to get this piece out first, and then develop the knight to e7. It's all about developing as quickly as possible. So here, Gukesh D actually made a slight inaccuracy, though it's not going to completely kill him, and he actually has an idea here. After c4, looking to further discombobulate the center, we have knight takes, queen takes, and then knight c6. This comes with an attack on the queen, looking very familiar to our example of why taking the queen out too early is a bad idea. We've developed our knight to c6, and we're forcing the queen to move. So queen moves back, we play d4, further taking space and control of the center. Ding Liren responds with a simple e3, and here we play bishop to c5. We have all of our pressure on d4, and if the pawn takes, bishop just takes back, and we have our pieces completely developed other than this light square bishop. Ding Liren continues with knight to c3, developing another piece into the action. We castle, and in this situation, both sides are completely developed. You would think that there would be some sort of big advantage in the opening, but the truth is this. You don't win games in the opening, you lose games in the opening. So by just playing a solid, clean opening, you're going to have tons of attacking chances to win this game. And believe it or not, Gukesh D does win this game. But here's the main point. This particular opening, does anybody know what this opening is called? If you do, I'm very impressed. So let me know in the comment section, pause the video, let me know what this particular opening is called. But I'm going to spoil it here. This opening is called, I'm going to read it off because I've never heard of this in my life. I'm a 2100 ELO. I don't know what this opening is. It is the King's Indian Attack, French Reversed Grunfeld Variation. One of 1400 different openings that you might find when you play chess. Now, I'm leaving you with a question. Do you want to memorize all 1400 of these openings so you can say, oh gee, it's the King's Indian Attack, French Reverse, Grunfeld Variation, I know this? Or are you going to memorize these 3 principles so you can get better at more important aspects of the game, such as tactics, middle games, and endgame theory? The choice is yours. I'm leaving you with the opportunity to do that. If you have found this video instructive, your next steps will be to learn some tactics and middle game ideas, which I'm going to attach below. Either way, welcome to the new year. Stay classy, my friends. Until next time.